With E3 just around the corner and CD Projekt Red teasing away that they'll be showcasing a new game, which we're more than certain is Cyberpunk 2077, we decided to get our research on and try and piece together what exactly we can expect to see in the Witcher devs' upcoming sci-fi RPG. Things that you probably didn't know about.
Personal responsibility.
Cyberpunk 2077 is set 57 years after the 1988 pen and paper role-playing game by Mike Pondsmith, co-creator of Cyberpunk 2077. There's actually 3 different editions of this game that have been released, namely Cyberpunk 2013, Cyberpunk 2020, and Cyberpunk version 3, which we'll be referencing bits and bobs from. The question that's probably on your mind is, what in the world is Cyberpunk anyway? Well, besides meaning cybernetic punk, it's also the name of what the characters used to be called in the Cyberpunk world. Come Cyberpunk version 3, Cyberpunks got rebranded as Edgerunners, and these are the guys you'll likely be playing in the 2077 game, but we'll get into that more in just a little while. Throughout this video, we'll also be referencing the Cyberpunk 2077 teaser trailer, but it's worth noting that the teaser was developed by an independent studio who were only given some concept art by CD Projekt Red, so we're very much up in the air about what will and will not be in the game, but with Pondsmith working on the title, we're likely to see a lot of his original work featured in the game, just a little more evolved, especially as 2077 takes place 57 years after the 2020 set tabletop game. First off, the history of the Cyberpunk world. As the title suggests, Cyberpunk 2077 takes place in the year 2077. Before that though, the last pen and paper edition took place sometime in the 2030s. But what about the history of the world before all these cybernetic enhancements and whatnot? The history of the cyberpunk world is drastically different to our own reality. In 1996, the United States collapsed due to the world stock market crash of '94, which left the country being overwhelmed by unemployment, homelessness, and corruption. Eventually in '97, the US Constitution was suspended and martial law was established. In that very same year, the Middle East was basically wiped out with a nuclear war, leaving the place a complete radioactive wasteland. To sum up the next decade, there are all sorts of plagues, wars, and more ravaging Cyberpunk's version of the world. Oh, and the Soviets are still around too. As for the cyberpunk movement, in the late 1980s, the Germans were already developing organic circuitry, but it wasn't until the 90s where people were able to acquire organic chipped arms and legs. This was the very early stages of bioengineering before nanotech became a huge thing and the whole cybernetically enhancing yourself stuff became a massive fad. In 2001, the framework of the net was in place with the construct of the WorldSat network. The net was basically a vast electronic information exchange where knowledge was the currency and netrunners were essentially the rulers. Fast forward to 2014 and a renegade netrunner plants the data crash virus into the net, and by 2025, 98% of it was infected and it went dark. At this point, governments were replaced by megacorporations due to the crash of '96. By 2020, megacorps ruled the world economy along with a lot of the non-economic world. There was a glimmer of hope that after the fourth corporate war in 2022, where millions of lives were lost, that the governments would take back control. But it was only a matter of time until the corporate warlords were back thanks to organised crime factions such as the Mafia and Yakuza, who were offline before the data crash. It was easy for them to take power and thus began the rise of neocorps. And with the rise of neocorps came the rise of altcorps, which is where you as a cyberpunk/edgerunner come in. Now there's about a 40+ year difference between the last pen and paper Cyberpunk game and Cyberpunk 2077, so it's hard to really describe what the new world is currently like. Needless to say, it's safe to assume that based on the teaser trailer we can expect to see many of the factions, cities and corporations still around in this version of the world. What we do know is that the game will take place in Night City, which has been the central location in all the past pen and paper games. This is a megacity which is an amalgamation of San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, and of course Night City. There's actually a second megacity that's established in the cyberpunk world, which is thriving pretty decently, and this is an amalgamation of New York, Boston, and Washington. Truth be told though, in 2030 most of urban America was in complete ruins. Even Night City was a bit of a mess, but edgerunners occupy most of what's left. It's actually worth noting as well that in the 2030s, a third megacity began to explode along the Great Lakes, which expanded into Chicago, Detroit, and Toronto, so we could see this in full fruition come 2077. Going back to Night City, despite this place being one of a few megacities in the 2030s, it was still not the best of places due to multiple different factions ranging from corporate cronies to badass cyber mercenaries controlling different areas. As stated earlier, we take on the role of edge runners who represent the next generation of cyberpunk after all the wars and chaos and stuff. You'd think with a name like edge runners that these guys are basically the cyberpunk equivalent of blade runners, but you'd be wrong, so wipe that thought from your mind right now. We're going to set you straight, and the first step to doing that is realizing that there are 9 different roles to choose from as an edge runner. They ain't all just law officials hunting down rogues, you know? Here's a quick roundup of the different classes. You have your rocker boys who are the rockers, poets, and rebels of the street. Every rocker is fighting the system with the digital porter studios so that they can easily share their message. Next up are solos, who are hired assassins equipped with a gun in one hand and a cybernetic arm. Then you have your netrunners, which we mentioned earlier, who are simply cybernetic computer hackers. You have your corporates, who are slick business raiders and multi-millionaires. The techies, who are renegade mechanics and doctors. They can disassemble things and create something completely new out of the parts, and they're essentially the healers of the cyber world. Cops are basically the Blade Runner of this world, and we sort of get a glimpse of this class with the Psycho Squad in the Cyberpunk 2077 teaser. Medias are the hunters of truth. They go out and investigate stories to get the real truth and not the corporate-made truth. Fixers are the deal makers, smugglers, organisers, and information brokers of the world. And finally, we have nomads, who are the road warriors and gypsies that roam the highways. These were all classes that players could choose from when compiling their character for the pen and paper game. In an interview with Game Reactor, Mike Pondsmith shared that all these different classes of edge runners will feature in the game too, so we can get excited about the possibility of being some badass cop or just be a straight up journalist. But edge runners aren't the only faction to exist in this world. Going back to the 2030s now, we have Neocorps, formerly known as the Megacorps, back in power, and Alt Corps have risen to sort of put them at bay in Night City. Alt cults are essentially the factions of this world. In the pen and paper game, there are about 6 standout ones: Edge Runners, Reef, Rolling State, Riptide, Desnay, and Corporal Metal. Here's another quick rundown of all these factions. Edge Runners are the new wave cyberpunk. They center on self-reliance, renegade technology, and big guns to fight back the corpse. Reef are the survivors of a massive flood that decimated the US coast. To survive the flood, they spliced their DNA so that they could live in the ocean depth. Basically, they're kind of fish people. Desnay is a bit of an extension of the Megacorp cultures, but of the theme park world. There's not much more to it than that. Rolling State are a group that maintain their tribal structure at all costs and are constantly keeping their society mobile. Their nomadic vehicles are huge thanks to their mega structural building techniques. They are, for all intents and purposes, a massive mobile nation state. Riptide is a group of floating cities that came together to basically run away from pirates. And then finally, Corporal Metal, also known as Sea Metal, are full-body cyborgs who are trying to avoid getting exploited by the Megacorps/Neocorps. They banded together in a remote open desert and they discovered live metal, which lets them fully integrate cyborging into all aspects of its society. Now, linking back to the Cyberpunk 2077 teaser trailer, we see a cyborg lady who seems to have massacred a whole bunch of people. From the bullets scraping her metallic skin to the cybernetic blades coming out of her forearms, it looks as though she's part of Sea Metal, so we're very likely to see these guys throughout the game along with the cop edge runners. So here we are. We know the history, the world as it is now, the classes, and the factions, but what about the tech? In the history of the cyberpunk world, we briefly touched upon the birth and rise of cybernetic enhancements, which later became cyberware that many citizens could enhance themselves with by simply walking into a surgery or even shopping mall clinics for some minor installations. Getting an enhancement is as easy as getting your ear pierced in cyberpunk lore. There's a whole host of cyberware that players could get, but we're just going to focus on a few specifics which sort of cameoed in the Cyberpunk 2077 teaser. In the teaser, we get introduced to a squad of edge runners who are part of a task force known as the Psycho Squad. Their role is to hunt down armoured cyborgs who've lost their minds to cyberpsychosis and ultimately end up just murdering everyone, as the teaser amply demonstrates. Now, edge runners use all sorts of gear and cyberware. In Cyberpunk version 3, they use a special little bit of cybertech called a new cyb, which is basically embedded arm/leg bands that project lamellar plating over the user's skin, and it can integrate rings, bracelets, and snap-on modules that carry extra power, weapons, and other abilities. Players can also get modules for their head, eyes, and sexual organs. How kinky. As for what we see in the teaser trailer, the Psycho Squad members seem to be equipped with gear from Cyberpunk 2020, such as the battle gloves, which cover the entire hand and forearm and have artificial muscle and hydraulics. They also seem to be wearing smart goggles, which in the Cyberpunk world is the alternative to having cyber optics actually implanted into your skull. Instead, you can just wear smart goggles that you can take on and off and plug into your smart gun. This is only a small, tiny minuscule glimpse into the cyberware that we could see in the game based on the past tabletop rulebooks. We're most likely to see a more advanced version of the Edge Runner tech making an appearance in Cyberpunk 2077, along with some cyberware from the other alt cults. However, 57 years is a lot of time during which things could well evolve. So that's everything we know about the Cyberpunk world based on the previous pen and paper games that have been released, and should give you an inkling as to what to expect from Cyberpunk 2077. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the Resero network.